The gunshot split the night like a crack of thunder. Ezra Holloway threw off his blanket and grabbed the Winchester leaning against the bedpost. His bare feet hit the cold wooden floor. He was moving before his eyes fully opened. Outside, the sky burned orange. His stable was on fire. Ezra burst through the front door, rifle raised, scanning the darkness beyond the flames. 4 shadows on horseback, already galloping toward the mountains. He could have taken a shot, maybe hit one. But they were too far, moving too fast, and his horses were screaming. He ran toward the stable. The heat hit him like a wall. Inside, 3 horses thrashed against their stalls, eyes wild with terror. The smoke was too thick, the flames too high. Ezra grabbed a blanket from the fence, dunked it in the water trough, and wrapped it around his face. He kicked open the first stall door. Too late. The mare collapsed, her coat already blackened. The other 2 followed within minutes. By the time Ezra stumbled back from the inferno, coughing smoke from his lungs, all 3 animals were dead. He stood in the snow watching years of breeding stock burn to ash. That was when he saw the message, carved deep into the wooden gate with a hunting knife. 2 words that would change everything: sell or burn. Ezra Holloway owned 1,000 acres of the finest land in Wyoming Territory, timber to the north, pasture to the south, a creek that never froze running straight through the middle. He had bought this land in 1866 with 4 years of Union Army wages and a bullet scar across his ribs. His wife Abigail had loved this place. She planted roses by the front porch. She hung curtains in every window. She filled the house with the smell of bread and the sound of laughter. For 12 years they built something together, something real. Then the fever came. Abigail died in the winter of 1880. She was 34 years old. Ezra buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, facing east toward the sunrise. He never planted roses again. He never hung new curtains. He let the silence swallow everything she had made bright. Since then, Ezra had become a man carved from stone. He worked himself to exhaustion every day. He spoke to no one. He ate without tasting. He slept without dreaming. The house that Abigail had filled with warmth became a tomb, and Ezra became its ghost. Now someone was trying to take even that from him. Virgil Ransom owned the Blackwood Ranch to the south. 10,000 acres of cattle country that still was not enough for a man like him. Ransom had been a Confederate officer during the war, a man who gave orders and expected them followed. He came west afterward, like so many others, looking to rebuild what he had lost. But Ransom did not rebuild. He took. Over the past 3 years, he had acquired every small ranch surrounding his property. Some he bought for pennies on the dollar from widows and desperate men. Others he simply burned out. The owners who resisted had accidents, falling horses, hunting mishaps. One man drowned in a creek that was barely knee-deep. Ezra was the last holdout. Ransom needed the Holloway land to connect his ranch to the new Union Pacific Railroad spur being built 20 miles east. Without that corridor, his cattle would have to travel an extra 50 miles to reach the stockyards. That meant money. Ransom did not like losing money, so he sent his message carved in wood and written in fire. Ezra stood at his gate the morning after the attack, reading those 2 words over and over. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady. Something had shifted in his chest overnight. Something cold and hard had replaced the emptiness that had lived there for so long. He was done waiting for death to find him. If death wanted him, it would have to fight. 1 week later, on the 22nd of November, Ezra was mending fence line when he saw the figure in the snow. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky purple.
This isn't your fight. You can still leave tonight.
If I leave now, my whole life will be spent running away. I'll stay.
And gold. He had been working since dawn, replacing posts that the winter had rotted. His shoulders ached. His fingers were numb. He was thinking about coffee and nothing else when movement caught his eye. Something was coming across the north field. At first, Ezra thought it was a wolf. The shape was too small to be a man, too erratic to be a horse. He set down his tools and reached for the rifle on his saddle. He watched the figure stumble, fall, rise again, stumble once more. Then it fell and did not rise. Ezra mounted his horse and rode toward it. The snow was deep here, 3 feet in places, and the going was slow. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into something he did not expect: a woman. She lay face down in the snow, her black hair spread across the white like spilled ink. She wore a thin gray dress made of silk, Chinese in style, with a high collar and slits up the sides. The fabric offered no protection against a Wyoming winter. It was torn at the hem, stained with dirt and what looked like old blood. But what stopped Ezra cold were her feet. She was barefoot. Her feet were raw and bleeding, the skin torn away by miles of walking on frozen ground. A trail of red droplets stretched behind her, disappearing into the white distance. She had walked through hell to get here. Ezra dropped from his horse and knelt beside her. He turned her over gently, brushing the snow from her face. She was young, perhaps 26 or 27. Her skin had the bluish tinge of hypothermia. Her lips were cracked and white, but she was alive. Her eyes fluttered open, dark eyes almost black, that looked at him without fear, without hope, the eyes of someone who had already made peace with death. She whispered one word, "Help!" Ezra carried her to his horse, wrapped her in his coat, and rode hard for the house. She weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of dry sticks wrapped in silk. The cold radiating off her body soaked through his shirt within seconds. He kicked open the front door and carried her inside. The big armchair by the fireplace had been Abigail's favorite spot. Ezra had not sat in it once since she died. He had not let anyone else sit in it either. But now he placed the stranger in that chair, wrapped her in wool blankets, and built the fire until flames roared up the chimney. He heated coffee on the stove. Her hands shook too badly to hold the cup, so he wrapped his rough fingers around hers and helped her drink. The color slowly returned to her face. The shivering eased. "You need a doctor," Ezra said. His voice sounded rusty to his own ears. The woman shook her head. Panic flashed in her eyes. "No doctor," she rasped. Her accent was thick, the words careful. "No money. I work." "Work?" Ezra stared at her torn dress, her frozen feet, her bruised arms. "You can barely stand." "I cook. I clean. I am strong." She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something besides exhaustion in her eyes. "Steel. I work for Stay." Ezra studied her for a long moment. This woman had walked through a Wyoming winter in bare feet. She had survived what should have killed her. There was something in her that refused to break. "What is your name?" he asked. "Maylin." "Where did you come from, Maylin?" The steel in her eyes flickered. Pain replaced it, deep and old. "California, gold mining camp near Rock Springs." She paused, gathering herself. "My father was Chen Wei. He was a scholar in China. Here, he worked the mines. He taught me to read, to shoot, to survive." Her voice dropped. "Last year, bad men came. A mob. They burned the camp, killed the Chinese workers. My father stood between them and me. He told me to run." She looked down at her ruined feet. "I have been running ever since." Ezra said nothing. He knew about mobs. He knew about running. He knew about standing between someone you loved and the thing that would destroy them. "You can stay tonight," he finally said. "We will figure out the rest tomorrow." He gave her the spare bedroom and went back
My father said there are things more valuable than breath.
My wife said the same thing before she passed away.
to his own. Sleep did not come easy. Every creak of the old house made him reach for his rifle. But for the first time in years, the silence did not feel quite so heavy. The next morning, Ezra woke to a smell he had almost forgotten. Fresh bread. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Maylin stood at the counter, kneading dough. She had torn strips from an old sheet to bandage her feet. The floor, usually tracked with mud and dust, was swept clean. The stove gleamed like it had not gleamed in years. She looked up when he entered. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her silk dress, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. "Porridge is hot," she said, nodding toward the stove. Ezra sat down. He ate the oatmeal she placed before him. Simple, hot, well made. She did not sit with him. She stood by the stove, eating from a small bowl, watching him with careful eyes. After breakfast, Ezra walked to the back room. He had not opened this door since Abigail died. The smell of lavender still lingered inside, faint but unmistakable. Her scent, her presence. preserved in the stillness. He crossed to the cedar chest in the corner and pushed aside a quilt. His hands found what he was looking for. Leather work boots, women's size, good quality. Ezra stood there for a long moment, his thumb tracing the worn leather. He remembered Abigail wearing these boots, laughing as she chased a chicken across the yard. He remembered the sound of her voice, the warmth of her hand in his. He took a breath, then another. Then he carried the boots out to the kitchen. Mei Lin looked at them, then up at him. "Put these on," Ezra said, his voice rough. "Cannot work barefoot." He turned away before she could see his face, before she could see what it cost him to give away this piece of his wife. An hour later, Mei Lin came outside to help him. She was wearing the boots, stuffed with wool to fit her smaller feet. She walked with a limp, but she walked, and she did not stop. Ezra expected her to stay inside, to cook and clean, and nothing more. But she followed him to the barn, wrapped in his old coat. She watched him break ice on the water troughs. Then she picked up a second hammer and started breaking ice herself. She was not strong the way a man was strong, but she had leverage. She had endurance. She had something that would not quit. When Ezra told her to stop and rest, she shook her head and kept working. That evening, he came in from checking the fence line. He hung his heavy coat by the door and noticed something strange. The large tear in the shoulder, where barbed wire had ripped it open 3 months ago, was gone. Mended with tiny stitches, so fine they were almost invisible, stronger than the original fabric. He looked at Mei Lin, sitting by the fire with a needle and thread. "You fixed this," he said. She nodded without looking up. "Wind gets in through the tear, makes you cold." Ezra ran his thumb over the stitching. Such a small thing, such a simple act of care, but no one had thought about whether he was cold in a very long time. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick. "You gave me boots," she replied. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romance, not attraction. Something older and simpler. Recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to survive. The next morning, Virgil Ransom came to the Holloway Ranch. He rode a black stallion, expensive and mean-tempered. 4 men followed him, all armed with rifles, all wearing the hard expressions of men who killed for wages. Ransom stopped his horse 10 feet from the porch where Ezra stood with his Winchester. "Heard you found yourself a stray, Holloway." Ransom smiled, but his eyes were dead. He looked past Ezra to where Mei Lin stood in the doorway. "Interesting choice of company. What do you want, Ransom?" "Same thing I have always wanted. Your land." Ransom's smile widened. "I will give you 2 weeks. Take my offer. Generous price for a dying ranch." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Or next time, it will not be horses that burn." His eyes moved to Mei Lin. "The Chinese girl should be careful too. Accidents happen to her kind out here. Happens all the time. Nobody asks questions. Nobody cares." Ezra's hand tightened on his rifle. "Get off my land." 2 weeks, Holloway." Ransom turned his horse. "Think carefully." The riders disappeared into the snow. Ezra watched until they were gone, then turned to Mei Lin. "This is not your fight," he said. "You can leave. I will give you a horse, money, supplies. Head east. Find somewhere safe."
If they come from the south, we'll retreat to this position.
Then I'll hold the window. You guard the front door.
Mei Lin looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the Colt revolver from the table by the door, checked the cylinder with practiced hands, and set it back down. "My father did not run," she said quietly. "He stood between the mob and me. He died on his feet, facing the men who wanted to destroy us. I will not dishonor him by running now." She met Ezra's eyes. "I stay." That afternoon, Ezra discovered something important about Mei Lin. He was cleaning rifles in the barn when he heard a growl behind the house. Low and dangerous. He grabbed the Winchester and ran. A wolf stood in the snow near the woodpile. Gray and thin, ribs showing through its mangy coat. Driven down from the mountains by hunger, its yellow eyes were fixed on Mei Lin, who stood frozen with an armload of firewood. Ezra raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Mei Lin dropped the wood and moved. She pulled the Colt from her belt in one smooth motion and fired once. The wolf dropped instantly, dead before it hit the ground. The shot had struck directly between the eyes, 15 feet away. Perfect accuracy. Ezra lowered his rifle slowly. He stared at the woman standing in the snow, smoke curling from her pistol, her hands steady as stone. "My father taught me," Maylin said calmly. "In the mining camps, women who cannot defend themselves do not survive long." Ezra looked at her differently after that moment. This was not a victim he had rescued from the snow. This was a warrior who had found her way to his door. And warriors were exactly what he needed. The days that followed became a preparation for war. Ezra stopped thinking of Maylin as someone to protect. He began thinking of her as an ally. He taught her to read tracks in the snow, to identify approaching riders by the sound of hoofbeats. She taught him how to cook rice the way her father had made it, simple and filling, good fuel for hard days. Together they fortified the ranch, sandbags behind the windows, a shooting position in the barn loft with clear sight lines to the main approach, tripwires along the tree line that would rattle tin cans if disturbed. At night they sat by the fire and shared pieces of their past. Maylin told him more about her father. Chen Wei had been a scholar in Guangdong province, a man who could read classical poetry and calculate figures faster than any abacus. In America, he swung a pickaxe 12 hours a day and came home with bleeding hands. But he never complained. He taught his daughter everything he knew, preparing her for a world that would show her no mercy. "When the mob came," Maylin said quietly, staring into the flames, "he could have hidden. He could have let them take me. I was just a girl. They might have let him live." She paused. "But he stepped in front of them. He said something I did not understand then. He said, 'Some things are worth more than breathing.'" Ezra was silent for a long time. "My wife said something similar," he finally replied. "Before she died, she told me not to let the silence win. She told me to keep living, not just surviving." He looked at his hands. "I did not listen. For years I just existed, waiting for the cold to finish what the war started." "And now?" Maylin asked. Ezra looked up at her. "Now I remember what it feels like to have something worth fighting for." A week before Ransom's deadline, Ezra rode into Coldwater for supplies. The town was small and suspicious, the way frontier towns often were. People stared as he tied his horse outside the general store. They whispered behind their hands about the Chinese woman living at his ranch. He ignored them all. Inside the saloon, he found an old friend. Joseph Crow Feather sat alone at a corner table. 55 years old, his hair gray as winter sky, his face carved by decades of wind and hardship. He was Shoshone, one of the last of his band still living in the territory. During the war, he had served as a scout for the Union Army. Same regiment as Ezra, they had saved each other's lives more than once. "Heard about your trouble," Joseph said as Ezra sat down. "News travels fast. Not much else to do in winter." Joseph sipped his whiskey, his dark eyes sharp. "Ransom has been busy. Bought out 3 more ranches this year. The ones he could not buy, he
I have to finish what my father didn't get to do.
This door is always open. When you're ready, come back.
burned. I know. He killed my brother last spring." Joseph's voice was flat, but his hands tightened around his glass. "William said he was stealing horses, shot him in the back. No trial, no witnesses. He drained the whiskey. Just a bullet and a shallow grave." Ezra felt the old anger stir in his chest. He remembered William Crow Feather, a quiet man who smiled easily and never raised his voice. "I am sorry, Joseph. Sorry does not bring William back." Joseph set down his glass and met Ezra's eyes. "But making ransom pay might let his spirit rest. You want to help?" "I have been waiting for someone to give me a reason." A cold smile crossed Joseph's weathered face. "Now I have one." They were ambushed on the way back to the ranch. 2 of Ransom's men had positioned themselves in a narrow canyon, rifles ready, waiting for Ezra to ride into their crossfire. The first shot hit the ground near his horse's hooves, sending the animal rearing. Joseph reacted faster than a man his age had any right to move. His Sharps rifle boomed once, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. One of the attackers tumbled from the rocks above, dead before he landed. Ezra fired 3 times at the second man, driving him behind cover. The exchange was brutal and brief, less than a minute of thunder and smoke. When the gunfire stopped, both of Ransom's men lay dead in the snow, but Ezra had taken a bullet in his left shoulder. Back at the ranch, Mei Lin cut away his shirt and cleaned the wound with whiskey. Her hands did not shake. Her movements were precise, practiced, efficient. "You have done this before," Ezra said through gritted teeth. "Many times. Mining camps are dangerous places. Cave-ins, explosions, fights." She threaded a needle with silk thread. "My father taught me to stitch wounds when I was 12 years old. Hold still." Joseph Crow Feather watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. "The woman has steady hands," he observed. "She has more than that," Ezra replied. The ultimatum came 3 days before the deadline. Joseph found it pinned to the front gate at dawn. A piece of gray silk, the same fabric as Mei Lin's dress, stained with dried blood. A note attached in rough handwriting. "Give us the Chinese girl, or you all die. You have until tomorrow." Ezra read the note twice, then he handed it to Mei Lin. She stared at the bloody silk for a long moment. Her face was calm, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They found another Chinese woman somewhere," she said quietly. "They did this to her to send a message, to show what they will do to me." "You can still leave," and Ezra said. "Take the fastest horse. Ride east through the night. They will not follow that far." Mei Lin shook her head slowly. "My father did not run. He faced the mob because he knew that running only delays death. It does not prevent it." She picked up the Winchester from the table. "I am done running, Ezra. I have been running since California. I am tired." Joseph Crowfeather grunted his approval from the corner. "This woman has the heart of a warrior," he said. "She belongs with us." Ezra looked at both of them, the old Shoshone scout with vengeance in his eyes, the young Chinese woman with iron in her spine, 3 people from 3 different worlds, united by a common enemy. "Then we do not wait for them to come to us," Ezra said. "We take the fight to them first." The plan was simple. Ransom's supply wagons were stored behind the Blackwood Ranch house. 3 wagons loaded with food, ammunition, and whiskey for his hired guns. Without those supplies, his men would scatter within a week. No pay, no food, no loyalty. They would strike at night, burn the wagons, kill whoever got in their way, then retreat to the Holloway Ranch and prepare for Ransom's retaliation. But the weather had other plans. On the night of December 6th, the sky turned the color of iron. The temperature dropped like a stone falling into a well. Within hours, snow began to fall so thick that visibility dropped to arm's length. The wind screamed down from the mountains, carrying ice that cut like razors. The worst blizzard in a decade had arrived. They were trapped. For 3 days, the storm raged without mercy. Joseph kept watch by the window, sleeping in short shifts, rifle across his knees. Mei Lin rationed their food carefully, stretching what remained. Ezra checked the fortifications again and again, reinforcing weak points, preparing for what would come when the White Fury finally passed. On the second night, with the fire burning low and the wind howling like a living thing outside, Mei Lin reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a jade bracelet, green as summer leaves, intricately carved with symbols Ezra did not recognize. "This belonged to my mother," Mei Lin said softly. "She died giving birth to me. I never knew her face, only this bracelet and the stories my father told." She held it up to the firelight. "When the mob came, when my father lay dying in the street, I went back for this. I risked my life for a piece of stone. Perhaps that was foolish." "It was not foolish," Ezra said. He stood and walked to the back room. When he returned, he held a small wooden box. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. "My mother gave me this before I went to war," he said. "She told me it would bring me home safe, that as long as I carried it, I would find my way back." He opened the locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of a woman with kind eyes and gray hair. "I did come home, but she had died the winter before. I never got to show her that her gift had worked." Mei Lin looked at the locket, then at Ezra. "We both carry our families with us," she said, "even when they are gone." Joseph Crow Feather sat in the corner, silent. After a moment, he reached into his own shirt and pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a bear claw, yellowed with age. "My grandfather," he said simply. "He told me it held the spirit of the first bear he ever killed. that it would give me courage when I needed it most. He tucked it back into his shirt. I wore it the day William died. It did not help him, but maybe it will help me finish what he cannot. The three of them sat in silence as the storm raged outside. Three warriors from three different worlds, each carrying the weight of the dead, each fighting for something larger than themselves. The storm broke on the morning of December 8th. The sun rose brilliant and blinding over a transformed world. Drifts of snow reached the windowsills. The trees were bowed under white weight, and from the south a plume of snow dust rose against the clear sky. Riders, moving fast. Virgil Ransom and his two remaining men, charging toward the ranch with murder in their hearts. The failed ambush and the destroyed supplies had pushed him past caution. He wanted blood now, not land. Joseph took position in the barn loft with his Sharps rifle, the long barrel resting on a hay bale with clear sight lines to the main approach. Maylin crouched beside the upstairs bedroom window with the Winchester, her breath fogging the cold glass. Ezra walked onto the front porch, rifle in hand, and waited. Ransom stopped 50 yards from the house. His face was red with cold and fury. His horse stamped impatiently beneath him. "Time is up, Holloway," he shouted. "Hand over the land and the Chinese whore. Do it now and I will let you live. Refuse and you all die." Ezra said nothing. He simply raised his rifle. "Kill them!" Ransom screamed. The world exploded. Joseph's Sharps boomed from the barn, and one of Ransom's men flew backward off his horse, a red hole in his chest. The second man spurred forward, firing wildly, but Mei Lin's Winchester cracked twice from the upstairs window. Both shots found their mark. The man crumpled and fell. 2 down in less than 10 seconds. Only Ransom remained. But Ransom had not survived the war and 20 years of frontier violence by being stupid. While Ezra focused on the frontal assault, Ransom had circled wide, using the confusion as cover. He came around behind the barn, silent as a snake, and climbed the ladder to the loft. The shot came from inside the barn, a single crack that echoed across the snow. Joseph Crow Feather fell from the loft door, tumbling through the air, landing hard in the snow below. Blood spread across his chest, melting the white around him. "Joseph!" Ezra ran toward his fallen friend. Ransom emerged from the barn, pistol raised. He fired twice. One bullet grazed Ezra's thigh. Ezra went down, rolling behind a water trough as splinters exploded around him. "Should have taken the money, Holloway." Ransom advanced, firing again. "Should have sold when you had the chance." Ezra returned fire, but his leg was bleeding badly. His shots went wide. Ransom kept coming, using a fence post for cover, working his way closer. Click. Ransom's pistol was empty. He drew a hunting knife instead and charged. Ezra tried to stand, but his wounded leg buckled. Ransom slammed into him, and they went down together in the bloody snow. The knife flashed. Ezra caught Ransom's wrist, but the younger man was stronger, fresher, driven by rage. The blade inched closer to Ezra's throat. "You should have died years ago," Ransom hissed, his face inches away. "You and your dead wife and your worthless ranch. I am just finishing what time should have done." The knife touched skin. Blood welled. The gunshot came from behind. Ransom stiffened. His eyes went wide with shock. He looked down at his chest where a red stain was spreading across his expensive coat. Then he looked up over Ezra's shoulder. Mei Lin stood 10 feet away. The Colt revolver was steady in her hands, smoke drifting from the barrel. Her face was pale but set, determined. Ransom tried to speak. Blood bubbled from his lips instead. He collapsed sideways into the snow and did not move again. Ezra lay in the bloody snow, breathing hard, staring up at the winter sky. Mei Lin appeared above him, helping him sit up, checking his wounds. "Joseph!" Ezra gasped. "Check Joseph!" She ran to where the old scout had fallen. Ezra dragged himself across the snow, his wounded leg leaving a red trail behind him. When he reached Joseph, he already knew. Joseph Crow Feather was still alive. Barely. His eyes were open, fixed on the sky. Blood soaked through his shirt with every shallow breath. "Did we get him?" Joseph whispered. "Ransom. He is dead," Ezra said. "Mei Lin shot him. It is over." A ghost of a smile crossed Joseph's weathered face. "Good. Good." His hand found Ezra's and gripped it weakly. "Tell William. Tell him I kept my promise. Tell him. His voice faded. His grip loosened. Joseph Crow Feather, scout and warrior, died looking up at the Wyoming sky he had known all his life. Ezra knelt beside him for a long time. Maylin stood nearby, silent, giving him space for his grief. When he finally stood, his face was carved from stone. "Help me bury him," he said, "on the hill, next to Abigail. He deserves to rest with family." The sheriff arrived that afternoon. Henry Prescott was a practical man who had served in the same regiment as Ezra during the war. He looked at the 3 bodies scattered across the Holloway property, listened to the story, and nodded slowly. "Self-defense," he said. "Ransom and his men attacked your ranch. You defended it. That is what my report will say." "And Joseph?" Prescott looked at the fresh grave on the hill, next to the older one marked with a simple wooden cross. "Joseph Crow Feather died defending a friend. That is a good death for a warrior." He tipped his hat. "I am sorry for your loss, Ezra. Both of them." After the sheriff left, Ezra stood by the 2 graves for a long time. Abigail on the left, Joseph on the right, both facing east toward the sunrise. Maylin joined him as the sun began to set. "He was a good man," she said. "He was the best man I knew." Ezra's voice was rough with grief. "Better than me? Better than most. He died fighting for something he believed in. That is not a small thing." Ezra looked at her. This woman who had walked through a blizzard on bare feet, who had stood her ground when she could have run, who had saved his life when it mattered most. "No," he agreed. "It is not." The snow began to melt in early March. The creek thawed and started running again. Green shoots pushed through the brown earth. The valley came alive with the sounds of returning birds. On a mild morning, Maylin packed her few belongings into saddlebags. Ezra watched from the porch, saying nothing. "California?" he finally asked. "Yes, to find my father's bones." She tightened the straps on the bags. "The mob threw the bodies into a ravine outside town. I need to find him, bury him properly, give him the respect he deserves." Ezra nodded slowly. He understood. Some debts could only be paid in person. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. Inside was money, more than enough for the journey and whatever came after. "For the work you did here," he said, "you earned every cent." Maylin took the pouch. Then Ezra pulled out something else, the silver locket that had belonged to his mother. "I cannot take that," Maylin said, stepping back. "It is all you have left of her." "My mother said this locket would bring someone home safe." Ezra pressed it into her hand. "I want you to have it. And when you have finished what you need to do in California." He paused, looking at the 2 graves on the hill. "The door here stays open, for as long as you want it." Maylin looked at the locket for a long moment. When she raised her eyes, they were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Ezra, for the boots, for the home, for believing I was worth saving when I had stopped believing it myself." "You saved me too," he said quietly. "More than you will ever know." She mounted the horse he had given her, wearing the heavy leather coat he had insisted she take. She looked back once, raised her hand, then turned and rode east toward the rising sun. Ezra stood on the porch and watched until she disappeared over the hill. Then he walked back inside, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down in Abigail's chair. The house was quiet, but the silence no longer felt like death. It felt like waiting for something to begin. That autumn, a letter arrived at the Holloway Ranch. The envelope was worn from travel, marked with stamps from California. Inside was a silver locket and a single sheet of paper. The paper held only one line, written in careful English. "I am coming home."
The story leaves a profound lesson about courage, the value of choice, and the true meaning of living, not just existing. The male protagonist is the image of a man who has endured war, loss, and years of prolonged loneliness. After his wife's death, he has no purpose, no faith, allowing time and coldness to wear him down day by day. But the event, the fire that consumed the stables and the threat of sell or be destroyed, forces him to confront the core question: continue waiting for death or stand up to protect what remains? The appearance of the Asian woman is not only a turning point in the plot, but also a symbol of the will to survive and human dignity. She has lost her homeland, her family, been driven out and forced to flee through the harsh cold. Yet, her most valuable quality is not her skill or strength, but her unwavering resolve. She refuses to flee again. Through this character, the story emphasizes that being a victim does not equate to weakness, and a painful past does not define a person's worth. Another major lesson is the power of companionship. 3 people from 3 different worlds, a Wild West veteran, an oppressed immigrant woman, and a Native American who lost a loved one, find common ground in integrity and unresolved grief. Standing together, they not only fight evil but also heal themselves. The story shows that justice and courage often don't come from power or numbers, but from ordinary people who dare to stand up for what is right. Ultimately, the story's deepest message lies in the concept of home. Home is not just a piece of land or a wooden house in the valley, but a place where people are recognized, respected, and have a reason to return. When the male protagonist reopens his heart, and when the female protagonist says, "I'm coming back," it's a moment that confirms that hope doesn't die after loss. It's just waiting to be reawakened. The story reminds us that sometimes, what saves a person isn't defeating their enemy, but finding meaning in life to continue living fully.